I'm really happy to be back. So, I recorded and watched the talk from last time and realized how many things we touched on. And it was like, wow, we really went for it. Um, I'm going to try real hard to make this very practical and just be really solutions oriented because I feel like the last talk I kind of threw out a lot of explanations and a lot of ideas explaining the word energy in connection to and defining it as electromagnetic frequency. So for me, when people say energy, that's what I hear. The word energy, the kind of being the container for meaning, I hear electromagnetic frequency. Everything from energy, like I need more energy, I'm tired, to that person has good energy, like across the board. When I hear that word, I think electromagnetics, and I tend to, and that's why last time I talked a great deal about the connection between magnetism as the platform or the canvas that electric is expressed on, and the frequency basically emitted from that is the information that is expressed from the combination of those two things. So you could say that the masculine and the feminine, masculine would be electric and feminine would be magnetic in that scenario, giving birth to frequency, which is an energetic expression in the form of information. Visible frequency we typically refer to as light. So, but our senses are not absolute, meaning that some frequencies we see, some we don't. So, scientifically speaking, they could all be called light, or if you'd like, which is why a lot of people, like, we're all emitting light right now as we speak, just not visible light. So our senses don't necessarily pick that up. But that's why I kind of dove into, and so that light is a frequency that is expressed by the combination of our electric and our magnetic. And that's basically what I look at as all living things, the spark, if you will, that's in all living things that makes them alive is their electromagnetic charge, basically. So a living person and a dead person, one person is conducting electricity and one is not. The chemistry is the same. Their chemicals don't change. So this is kind of how we get into health with all this, and so that's kind of the just a recap to say when I refer to energy, I'm talking about the combination of electric, magnetic, and dealing in frequency, because frequency, aka light, visible or not, is really the whole point of how I view health and how I see light as information that's communicated to our bodies. So it's kind of interesting. I was reading not too long ago about the sun's expression kind of being dictated by the alignment of the planets around it, and they all have magnetic fields. And so I found that really interesting, especially coming in to talk to this group, because it was so clear to me of how these things, as you guys know, how these things have an energetic effect on us and everything in our solar system. My talk last time was kind of trying to draw a mirror or a parallel between the sun and what it is in the outer verse, and an electron being a small sun and what I would call your inner verse, and those being a mirror of each other. So you can look out to the solar system and see what's going on the outside, or you can look in and see the solar system on the inside, which would be this dance of the electrons, which would be your little suns going on internally. Your inner and outer verse are coming together and they make your universe. Uni meaning one, so they combine to make the one. The reason that's significant is because the communication between your inner verse and outer verse dictates your moment, your reality in this moment. That's why it's important to pay attention to the outer verse. It's also important to pay attention to the inner verse and to know how those two things in a feedback loop are interacting. So everything is constantly interacting with the environment that it's in, and you can't split that. So you're having an effect on me and I'm having an effect on you. So I'm looking here, you're nodding, that comes back to me. Nodding is agreeing, so then I'm going to respond positively to that, and that's this interaction, right, that's going on constantly with you and your outer environment. Your inner environment is then communicating with your outer environment in this feedback loop. We call it communication, but we communicate with all things living, essentially all things electromagnetic in a sense. So there's natural electromagnetics. That's why I could explain the science behind what was traditionally referred to as like tree hugger stuff, because trees to me are like wired biotech. They're grounded receiver transmitters that are hardwired into the planet. Us and animals would be mobile devices. That's how that's how I understand biology. It's how I understand what humans are and what animals are, where we fit in this whole thing. And that's the story of frequency. Basically, we're wireless tech communicated. The transmitter is the sun. The wireless frequency is sunlight, and that's communicating with us, the receiver, and then we re-express that light. So food for me is a container for light. The whole food web starts with light. Photosynthesis, plants eat light and convert it into sugars. And then you either eat that or you eat the animal that ate the plant. Now that's a simple step explanation on how light works relative to food. But then I try to focus on the gut and the eye as the other, or so there's the gut, the eye, and the skin as the three surfaces to take in light. So you take in light contained in food, and then you get it from your eye and your skin. Also, just to mention, we were kind enough to get a spot here to do an article in the newest Solstice here that has a very practical explanation on what we call light calibrating. So if you understand that light is information, then natural light gives you information about the natural environment that you're in. And that's why it's significant. And that's why artificial light gives you the wrong information. So light is constantly changing with advancing tech. So energy efficient lights are lights that have had more frequencies stripped out of them. That's what makes them energy efficient. They use less energy because they express fewer frequencies, meaning they're even less natural. They have a worse biologic effect. So a lot of green tech is very, very bad for your health, and that's why you have to be careful, because a lot of these words are very misleading. I'm not saying that the green movement is not good. I'm extremely anti-pollution, but I'm also for the use of intelligence relative to technologies as a solution for health problems, because I know the electromagnetics of the actual tech. So that's why an energy efficient bulb is one that has a worse effect on your brain and maybe a better effect on the environment because it uses less energy. Then you have to pick and choose. In our house, and we'll get into some of the practical ways to address light, if you understand light as information, but that's just the visible frequency. Non-visible frequency would be you looking at your phone and seeing how many signals your phone picks up. In this room, if we each have a phone, we're going to pick up all those frequencies on your phone. If you're trying, if you've seen your computer, how many wireless connections. Well, why do you pick that up with your phone? Because it's a receiver. There's a transmitter that's transmitting a frequency. Then the receiver is picking that up. If you understand that's light that's not visible to you, aka frequency, that's wirelessly, meaning it's not hardwired with metal. It's using light, aka frequency, to communicate with the receiver. That if that makes sense to you, then you'll understand that you are a receiver transmitter of frequency because you're powered wirelessly by sunlight. So now you understand that light is frequency, and that frequency is communicating with you as a receiver transmitter, meaning that your biology is also picking up all those frequencies. So time I do a talk, it's an appeal to nature, because there's natural frequencies, and then we get into the modern age and the inability to explain so many of the things going on in the modern world is, for me, is very, very simple, because I just look at how the environment has changed relative to tech. which involves tuning into frequencies that are often not visible. Most people don't pay attention to things they can't see.
Is that how when you put your hand on the antenna for your...
You are an antenna. I recently did a blog post in detail about amalgam fillings. The more metal you have on your body, the more you will pick up. So things that traditionally didn't used to be an issue, we have to reframe. What was true 10 years ago is maybe not true today, and what was not true, and vice versa. So that's why there are things I'm becoming less and less popular by the day because technology is advancing at such a rapid rate that it is rendering old truths false. So historically, you could say, well, that like for me recently, I quit drinking coffee. Well, I'm a true I love coffee. I mean, I'm a passionate lover of coffee and have been for years and years and years. I think it was okay for me to drink coffee 10 years ago. How much tech has changed in the past now? What do I know about coffee for sure? That it measurably reduces blood flow to the brain. No one argues about this who's ever studied it. And that it dehydrates the brain. That's why when you go off of coffee, you get headaches, because there is a recalibration process of the actual constrictive nature of your brain being constricted is trying to open up, and it puts pressure on the brain around it because it's trying to return to normal function. So if I could give you a pill that would increase blood flow to your brain 25%, I could make millions of dollars, but I could give you an empty pill and say, don't take this with coffee. And it would, you see. So the thing is, I'm not saying coffee is the devil. I'm saying that this is an example of something that we have to reframe in the modern age because we're being neurologically dehydrated by frequency and Wi-Fi. So now, basically like a substance that is dehydrating you neurologically, if you're in an environment that is also dehydrating you neurologically, the combination of the two will make one thing far worse than it once was. Because a microwave oven is just overlapping frequencies. When you overlap frequencies, it heats things up. So one problem with Wi-Fi is that it's dehydrating all of us on an intercellular level, and the water in our brains and in our cells is the conductive battery for charge. What does that mean? That now neurological hydration becomes very important, whereas 10 years ago, it didn't make that much of a difference. What does that mean? Now I don't get to drink coffee anymore. 10 years ago I could, because I was not in an environment that was simultaneously dehydrating me neurologically. See how that works? You're going to see, I've seen in recent past people go one of two ways, where I see a lot of people getting sober and I see a lot of people falling down hard with addiction. I think that line is getting drawn more and more because we're being pushed that way through the dopamine alterations from light, because it does spike dopamine. And that's where the world of addiction is on the rise, because our neurology is being distorted by the tech environment that we're in. Most people are not making that connection. I touched on this last time, but that's where things like addiction and neurological disorders, autism, suicide, all kinds of things, especially in the younger generations, it's dramatically on the rise. I'm saying that this is the tech story, but the reason I started this by talking about frequency with your internal and external environment is because if those two things can communicate properly, you're in perfect health. When they can't hear each other, there's no communication. If this is my partner and our communication stops, our relationship stops. So if your relationship with your outside environment or your inside environment and your outside environment stops, your biology is guessing. It's confused. It doesn't know what to do. Frequencies in the environment are dissonant so that they compete with your natural frequencies and harmonics. I'm sorry.
The question was, what is his opinion of a biomat?
Well, first I'd have to know specifically about which. I've heard that phrase applied to a bunch of different products.
It's not gonna, it's something crystals,
Mhm.
and it has fine for that, and it goes through, there's no coils.
Yeah, I've seen them. I've been exposed to them. I've used them. I will say that with that specifically, it depends. I'm not going to say it's. I will say it's probably going to be. Let me put it this way: it's so far down on my list that it's nothing I've pursued at all. Not that I'm not saying it has no use, but the problem is that all solutions have to be compared to something. So that's why some people would say, all pharmaceuticals are bad. Well, I could make a case that they all are unnatural substances that conflict with our biology in some way, but then it's also like you might be in a situation where like the toxic side effect is not near as bad as the benefit. I don't pick sides with just about anything. I just try to look at it and say compared to what. So I think people that have, like, I know a lot of people that have had a lot of success with biomats. I will say that I would like to see them do the long list of things that I know to be solutions, for natural solutions first, because I don't trust anything plugged into a wall. Because it's alternating current, and this is a good thing for everybody to pay attention to, is that alternating current goes back and forth, it flickers back and forth. You run on DC current, meaning that anything coming out of that plug in terms of frequency is going to raise a red flag for me.
So how would you rehydrate?
Rehydration, in terms of in the dehydrated scenario.
The tech takes the hydration out of the
Yes,
tank.
yes.
So is there a way to rehydrate?
One of the reasons I think, well, that's definitely increasing your fats, reducing carbs, because, I mean, so camels in the desert have humps. The humps are made of fat, right? Camels have really good mitochondria. Mitochondria are where those electrons are moving around inside your cells. They electromagnetically power everything, okay? Camels have really good mitochondria. So when they're in the desert, there's no water. They breathe. That's oxygen. And they've got stable hydrogen in the fat in their humps. And so then they tap into their fat reserves. That hydrogen mixes with the oxygen in their electron chain transfer, H2O. They make water. Camels make a lot of water. That's why they make water better than horses do. So I've heard it said, it's tough to pick a camel to ride in the desert because their mitochondria are so good you can't tell which ones are old and which ones are young. They all look the same. Have you ever seen a camel if they're growing once they hit their adult size? So you might pick the ancient camel and it might just drop over dead. They say take the horse, because then at least you can pick a young one, and But that's a story of why, like, have you heard of people putting fat in their coffee now? Well, if I'm telling you coffee dehydrates you neurologically, and I'm telling you that fat helps to offset that, then it would make sense that there's a big push to put fat in coffee.
Well, there is with the paleo, right?
Of course.
Make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
3 months ago.
Yeah. And that's one of the hacks that people are doing to offset that function. Depending on the fat too is also a factor, right? And I don't typically get into a ton of food with groups because I always ask, well, where are you? And I've done a talk kind of on the where and the when to determine the what you eat. So I tend to not support blanket diets of any kind. Because if you're down at the equator, you go there for vacation, you can eat completely different than if you take a vacation to Alaska. The banana to the Eskimo is no good. The banana didn't change, right? So food to me is a container for light. Light is re-expressed in your gut, communicating your environment to your inner verse from your outer verse. You see what I mean? We take things in to tell us what environment we were in, and then we express things with that environment. So you and your inner environment are constantly having a conversation. The conversation's made of frequency, aka light. So when I talk about food, I'm talking about what environment are you in, and it's as specific as are you indoors or outdoors when you eat it. It's that specific. So it's not just local seasonal, even though that's a good guideline. I will say in the modern world, DHA is key. DHA is very unique because it interacts with light. So DHA is most centralized in the eye, then the brain, then the rest of the body. It's because DHA converts sunlight to DC electric current in your brain. And I've talked with high-level people in the supplement industry about DHA and asking them, have you done any studies in a controlled light environment? None.
What is DHA?
DHA is from fish. So that's why if you have no light in your environment and you're an Inuit up north where there's very little light, that's why it's cold. That's why there's not plants, because plants eat light, right? So there's low plants, but then they offset that by increasing the light absorption in their body through their eye with DHA and in their gut by eating lots of fish. That's why cold water fish reside where? Up north. People at the equator don't need to eat lots of cold water fish. Why? Because they get tons of light from their skin and their eye. So DHA in the modern world is just one of the things I can say is a dietary must. So I won't get into a whole lot of food outside of, I mean, you can watch the talk is on YouTube. It's the Food Talk 1, and it goes through all the diets, and I go into great detail. But I will say that in terms of food, we all need lots of DHA because our light environment's very compromised. And the reason that people are going high fat, which is also an Inuit trait, high fat and away from carbs, is because we need more light. So that's what you do if you want to optimize your mitochondria, meaning the little engines inside your cells that make electromagnetic frequency that's communicated down the chain. Your charge is increased by doing these things. Now, if you're at the equator, you don't have to boost your charge internally because you get it from the outside in the form of sunlight. Better your tan, more carbs you get to eat. It's what I typically is a pretty safe rule, if that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's literally, I mean, that makes a difference, right? Because I can tell, with the person. So that's kind of, I mean, I hope that makes sense a little bit with some of the food story, but that's why fat as a mechanism of neurological rehydration is key. Like, that's one way to do that. Another one is, well, just natural fats, not anything man-made, created, like, not, none of the trans fats and all that stuff are out. Here, it's like in this environment, like avocados, olive oil, I eat tons of, bacon and beef and like fatty stuff, and my health has dramatically changed as a result of incorporating those and kind of decreasing and strategically consuming carbs. I mean, I do eat more carbs now because it's June than I did, if we would have been talking in December, it would have been a different thing. So anybody who tells you a one-size-fits-all diet doesn't,
More people are attracted to carbs in the wintertime.
Well, and part of that is that they're low energy because the sun is low, and so they want quick energy in the form of carbohydrate consumption because your body can use either one. Carbs or what's called ketones, which comes from fat. Proteins convert to glucose with sugar, but they're bound to fats in nature, like just about always. So that's why protein is stable. So that's a little bit on the food story and on the neurological hydration. I will say that my point about coffee and some of the other things is that things like coffee, alcohol, a lot of these things, the worse your tech environment, the worse the effect. So 10 years ago, the alcohol maybe didn't change, the tech environment changed. That also will affect you neurologically. So that's why a lot of things have to change. We have to change with the environment that we're in. It's not just about removing the tech from our environment, but understanding that what was once true has to now be questioned. And that's why we have to really look at historical references. There are some people that want to do therapies that were tried and true 100 years ago, well, I would look at that and I would say, okay, I'm not going to write it off but as old and obsolete, but I'm also going to filter it through the modern environment that we're in. So maybe doing coffee enemas now isn't as good as it once was.
Yeah.
See, just saying, like maybe juicing now isn't the same as it used to be because the pure straight sugar push. Now the tech I'm talking about is that it's so abundant in our environment that you're getting it from every angle.
Oh, yeah, if you could see all of the frequencies.
Yeah, we had a guy come out named Brian Hoyer who's with Shielded Healing, and he's a professional, and he came out and he did our home, and we were shocked. I mean, because we live in Atascadero, it's like pretty rural. It was scary, and the thing is that the reason I do these talks is because one is I feel like I understand the electromagnetic frequency story, which is EMF. If you hear people say EMFs, they're talking about electromagnetic frequencies. That's what EMF stands for. I always ask them, what does it mean? If they say, a lot of people say EMFs, they don't know it means electromagnetic frequency. Then if they say that, I say, well, what is electromagnetic frequency? If they don't know how magnetism works with electric to create frequency, then the whole conversation's a little lost.
Well, I've worked around EMF.
Yeah. 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 It's a thing. Well, I mean, how would you notice? Do you know what I mean? It's like,
I mean, I don't know.
that's the thing is this is all subsensory stuff, and we're not all created equal. So you get your mitochondria from your mother. Mitochondria are the EMF devices in your cells. They're the electromagnetic frequencies. So my mother was very, very sick, and I was taken from her at birth. I've been sick my whole life. I'm the canary in the coal mine because I'm affected by all these things. So I know what's coming for people who are not, but that's the whole thing, is it is not even. It's a bell curve. So you've got some that are affected right away, some that the first 10% are like, that's the canary, that's the one what's coming. Then you've got the 80%, the bell, and then you've got that last 10% where they can drink and smoke every day of their life and do they live into 100 that's the exception. That's the 10%, right? Like on the other end of that. Not that we should all encourage everybody to do that on the rest of the spectrum, because we all, So that mitochondria story is really, it's like in our society, we're seeing the 10% being knocked down, which is the elderly and the young. That's the weakest in the population, so they're getting knocked down. Okay, like if you look at the illness in those two populations, that's a good canary to tell you what's coming if things continue to climb that bell curve mountain. And I don't know when the bell curve will hit critical mass in terms of tech, meaning the amount of unnatural frequencies that your biology is exposed to that are having a negative effect. At some point that causes so much that we just don't know when. And we're not all created equal. So we're testing with things like 5G just means high level frequency. So as we're seeing that right now, so we're doing a big test. No one's ever done it in human history. Like no one's consistently been exposed to what's called 5G. You're seeing it in big cities, and so now we're finding out, we're learning, how long can the population withstand 93 gigahertz, 24 hours a day, before they have massive neurological effects, massive cardiac effects. Why the brain and the heart? Those are the two most electromagnetic parts of your body, right? So that's why I, being someone on the lower end of that mitochondrial bell curve, have to learn massive amounts of information about all this and have to do a massive amount of things right. I have to do more right than the average person. So, Yeah, so here's the thing, and now now with all that said, we'll get into solutions hopefully you believe me that unnatural tech-based frequencies are bad for health because they cause miscommunications and distortions within your biology. Unnatural electromagnetic frequencies. Non-native, it just means unnatural. So if you hear non-native EMF, that just means because like I said, sunlight is an electromagnetic frequency. It's just natural. Your biology has had millions of years to figure out how to interact with that information. Whereas 5G is like, your biology has no idea. Yes?
You said something about when the EMFs of the mother, that's
Yeah, so the mitochondria are the little electromagnetic frequency antennas, so to speak, within your cells that generate power. They're little electric plants, power plants within, and they create chemical energy as a byproduct. So chemistry stops there. So means if you have a disease that is above your mitochondria in the chemistry world and you treat it with chemistry, it will work. But if your disease is on the other side of that line, meaning it's a mitochondrial disease, then no amount of chemistry will help you. You see, so that's an important thing to note, why chemicals work sometimes and not other times. Because sometimes the disease is over here and sometimes it's over here. A lot of people take all the chemicals and don't get better.
right. And how would you know where you're at? It comes from your mother, you said?
So the mitochondria in your cells you get from your mother, which I think, that's why a connection between a mother and a child is a unique thing, as far as I've been told. I've never met my biological mother since the day I was born, so I don't know. But looking at it from the outside, I pay more attention to what people take for granted. You know what I mean? So I see these connections, and it's weird to me because I don't have that. So I notice it more than people who just go, "Oh yeah, it's just normal what it is." People love their moms. You know what I mean? It's just, but it's a different connection. It's special in the sense that it's subsensory. You have a subsensory antenna connection that involves frequencies between you and your mother, or you and your child, which is why mothers have a very deep connection with their children, unless maybe the mitochondria go real bad. Maybe that connection doesn't happen because those frequencies aren't communicating well. So in the modern age, if you want to know why a lot of mothers, I just saw an article where a mother, people are just doing horrible things to their kids. You know what I mean? It's shocking. And you go, how could any mother do that to her child? Because historically, the connection between a mother and a child, I'm saying, was electromagnetic. And the environment that we're in is distorting our electromagnetics, so the antennas are not syncing, so the mother is not recognizing her child in the way that she did 10 years ago. Does that make sense? I mean, that's a connection that a lot of people would not make when they look at societal issues between mothers and children. You see, I'm always looking through the electromagnetic frequency lens when I hear things that seem weird, or you think, that's weird that a mother would do that to her own child. That's so weird. It's not weird to me. I just look, where is she? Because the environment she's in is going to tell me how close she is able to be frequency connected to her child. This is how I'm trying to say we have to reframe a lot of the conversations. Whenever I hear people say, that's so weird, illness isn't weird to me. I look at the environment. Where does illness grow? In the environments that render our biology the weakest. So that's why your internal environment matters. What me and Clint are often looking at is what's the environment that you're actually living in? You see, if you're wired up with a Fitbit on your arm, a phone in your pocket, a Bluetooth device in your ear, you've got and you're tracking all this stuff with a device while you sleep, next to your cordless phone, while you sleep, with your router next to the bed, and you've got your smart meter, and then you've got it's I can keep going. But, and you're in the apartment next to the person who has their, meter up again. It's like you've got to look at the environment. where these things are happening. It's the first question I ask is where. What's the environment look like? Because your biology responds as fast to that frequency as it does to temperature. You walk outside, you get cold, you get goosebumps. Boom. Just like that. You know temperature variation quick. Why? Because your internal environment is communicating with the external environment. It feels cold and reacts. Your biology is always reacting. Your neurology is always reacting. Most people here remember a time when there wasn't the internet. So we developed in that time. The young age, like in younger people, have evolved and grown in this environment, so their biology is distorted as a result. Their behavior is not strange to me. It would be what I would expect in the lab if I put someone under blue lights, shined a bunch of frequency on them and watched them act. They can't connect with other people because they connect with tech. That's literal neurology is distorted. They literally do not have the ability to connect with another human because that's a frequency conversation.
So that's what the autism is?
Well, here's the thing. Autism is a difficult word because it's used often, but it's also clinically changed in the past few years. Meaning the word autism 5 years ago meant something different than it means right now. Well, clinically, right? Meaning in the book, the definition, the like accepted scientific diagnosis of autism changes. You see what I mean? So the word autistic now is a blanket for neurological malfunction. Now, historically, you could have a savant, which would be a child. Neurologically, if you have one thing that works real well, it will cost you somewhere. If you are exceptionally good at any one thing, it will be offset because that's how nature works. So show me brilliant people in history that weren't weird. I mean, the most brilliant people in history were probably not the people you wanted to be married to. You'd want to like go to their lecture or use their product but relationally maybe they were terrible because they were so focused on creating the world-changing thing they created, right? The most brilliant musician might have the worst relationships. Why? Because he's relating to his music far more than he's relating to, you see what I mean? Like, this is just how it works. Now, the word autism, from my perspective, is once again a societal bell curve where you have people that are far behind, people that are like maybe IQ ahead, and now we're taking those two 10%, the front and the back, putting them together, calling it the word spectrum. You're on the spectrum because you're equidistant from the norm. I'm saying the norm is changing dramatically. The word autism is... here's the thing. A boxer goes into a match. He takes a knock on the head. He walks out of the match brain damaged. Did he walk out autistic? No, not by a clinical definition. But if you have someone who maybe gets exposed to to metal exposure, you know what I mean? Like for me, when I was a kid, I got exposed to massive amounts of dental amalgams. It distorted my neurology. Did that make me autistic when I get whacked with metal and then my brain doesn't work the same way? You see what I mean? Like, the word is very relative. I don't like it when people use it, to be honest, because it's changed. So I have to ask, which autism are you talking about? And because it's a spectrum, it's a very relative thing. So you can test it, kind of. Here's an interesting point. If you expose a person to enough electromagnetic frequencies, it causes the exact same diagnosis as autism, neurologically. So we're becoming autistic, if you like the word. Like the young people are becoming autistic, but kind of. I'm saying they're becoming neurologically altered as a result of frequencies, and I don't need to include the word autism in that anywhere. Because there are people that are actually autistic, and then there are people that are like frequency-induced autistic, which would be a subcategory or a separate thing. It's very relative.
And we thought it was diet.
Yeah, well, and the truth is, like, that's a thing, right? But and tends to deal with, like, if you have neurological inflammation, like what treats autism, you see? So it's like it's also a state of being, right? So autism, if it can be reduced and increased using nutrition, can it be reduced and increased using frequency? Sure. The frequency stuff is more real than food because it happens faster, because light goes through your eye, it hits your brain straight away. Doesn't need to be digested, it doesn't need to circulate throughout the system, it doesn't have to go down here to come back up here, it just boom. It's that fast. So for me, I pay more attention to the light environment than anything else. And remember, light is just frequency. The non-visible light is non-visible frequency. That's all the Wi-Fi, it's all the stuff that we're in. I hope that doesn't go too far off with this, but I want to address some of the words that are constantly used. EMFs, autism, a lot of these words are so used. And that's why I try to encourage people, even like right now there's a big conversation between vaccination, don't vaccinate. I try to get people in either side to stop using the word autism and to look at the frequency environment as a factor. I can't get either one of them to. Pro or anti, neither one of them are talking about effects that are not relative to autism and effects of the tech environment that you're in. Because if you inject someone with aluminum in a microwave oven goes pop. So frequencies, that's a microwave oven. So now are you going to have, I'm telling you, this is electromagnetic. So if you get exposed to aluminum, might frequency be a good thing to think about? Now, if you get exposed to aluminum in a microwave oven and your brain goes pop, are you autistic now? Of course not. It's those just bad words. No, I mean in terms of how they're arguing over these words, and I'm like,
Come up with new terms.
I think the whole conversation has to change, and I always try to get people to ask, well, what environment was in? Because clearly some people are affected and some people aren't. So now let's start to actually look at this thing, and go, what are some factors that might be influencing these things? Very few people in health are looking at zip codes. That's going to become a big thing where people are going to start we're going to start seeing online, you'll be able to go and see what zip codes are people dropping. Because you don't want to, dying, getting ill, right? It's trackable based on hospitals, right? We can tell what zip codes, people are living longer and where people are. And now you're starting to see higher populated areas have more tech. Higher the tech, worse the effect. So you'll start to, this will be proven. The only problem is if you're using hospitals as a measure, what besides airports, hospitals, and army bases are more wired than hospitals? What are the lights and the tech like in your hospital? You go to the hospital, you've got lights you couldn't believe with so much tech right now. I'm not saying hospitals are bad. If I get hit by a car on the way home, I'm going straight to the hospital. But for a mitochondrial-based disease, that probably isn't the space for me to heal.
Well, what about the employees in the hospital?
Well, you'll see nurses, you'll see these people. I read an article recently about the effect that just the training to become a doctor takes such a toll on your health that's why at this point I have every confidence that I can sit down with, I've tried, to sit down with high level people and simply ask them some of these questions, because I can tell how much a person knows about health by what kind of lights they have in their office. You see what I mean? So it's I know this. So I know that our medical system is chemistry oriented. They're not thinking about frequency or light in the equation. But we do know, get a lot of these people that have mitochondrial diseases in a different environment and they just naturally heal. Why? Because you got them out of the environment that was causing the disease to begin with, which was the frequency environment. So you can't get well in the same environment you got sick in. You definitely can't get well in an environment that's worse than the one you got sick in, called a hospital. Once again, not bashing hospitals in general, but I do wish people are worried about the food in the hospital. I'm worried about, I don't care what they eat there. It's just a difficult, and that's the type of reframe that we need to have relative to health. We'll all probably, we'll all probably know people, and in our lives, we need to start reframing our ideas about some of the traditional views on health. because like these things, and I talked to a woman, her child had a neurological disease. Young child, they're in San Diego, which is wired up, you know what I mean? So right away I ask, where are you? San Diego, no surprise. Okay, so now you've got a young one who's underdeveloped in a high 5G environment, has a neurological issue, spending all her time in the hospital. She tells me the first tower they put up was on the children's hospital. So I'm like, okay, of course the kid's vegan at 3. So vegans, once again, if you're at the equator, great. If you're outdoors and at the equator, why? Because you're getting a massive amount of charge from your light environment. But if you're inside a hospital, you better be eating steak, because you shed electrons so fast, and iron has more electrons than magnesium. So the magnesium, the green blood of a plant, has less charge capacity than red iron, which is why Inuits up north who have low charge light environments have to eat lots of what? Not mangoes, right? Fat and flesh. That's what, and I'm not saying any of it's good or bad. I'm just explaining the why behind. So when people push a diet on anybody, and to put a child on a low charge diet with a neurological disease in a hospital in San Diego 5G with sunglasses on.
Wow.
So am I surprised? No, they're spending every dime they have to go to every doctor specialist that they can go to. What am I going to tell them? Put the kid on an Inuit diet, high fat, high electron consumption through animal consumption. I'm going to get the kid as far away from 5G as I possibly can. I'm going to totally rid. She said, we're protected from 5G because a healer